Hello everyone. Welcome back to the Dark Fears family. Tonight we venture into one of the most desolate and unforgiving places in the world, the Yukon, a land of endless wilderness where the cold seeps into your bones and silence is broken only by the howl of wolves or the cracking of ice. But beneath that frozen beauty lies something far darker. The Yukon has a history steeped in ghost stories, disappearances, and tales that locals whisper about but never tell aloud after nightfall. And tonight, you're going to hear them. Imagine driving alone on a snow-covered road, headlights cutting through the fog, when you suddenly see someone standing in the middle of the ice, motionless, watching you. Or camping in the forest, only to hear footsteps circling your tent, when you know you're miles away from the nearest town. These are 10 of the most disturbing true Yukon horror stories, and each one will leave you shivering long after the fire dies. So grab a blanket, turn off the lights, and join me. This is Dark Fears, and here, nightmares never sleep. In the frozen winter of 1973, a prospector named Earl Mackenzie set out into the Yukon wilderness with nothing but a sled, 2 dogs, and the promise of gold. Earl was tough, the kind of man who thrived in isolation, but weeks passed without anyone hearing from him. When locals finally mounted a search, they discovered his camp, half buried in snow, tools scattered, and the dogs still tied to a tree, barking endlessly. Earl himself was nowhere to be found. His journal lay open inside the tent. The last entry, scrawled in shaky handwriting, read, "Something is moving outside the camp at night." It doesn't sound like wolves. It doesn't sound like anything I've ever heard before. The searchers followed faint tracks leading away from the tent, deep into the woods. But the trail ended abruptly, as if Earl had simply vanished into the snow. No body was ever found. Some believe he froze to death. Others whisper that he encountered something far more sinister. My name is Daniel, and I've spent years retracing some of the most infamous Yukon disappearances. When I first saw Earl Mackenzie's abandoned camp, the air was so cold it burned my lungs. Snow crunched underfoot as I followed the faint tracks leading into the dense pine forest. They weren't normal footprints. Earl's boot imprints suddenly twisted, elongated, and then disappeared entirely, as if the snow itself had swallowed him whole. The deeper I went, the forest seemed alive. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the snow, and the wind carried whispers that weren't human. I remember stopping, heart pounding, thinking I saw a figure between the trees, tall, hunched, with glowing eyes. When I blinked, it was gone. My flashlight flickered, and in that brief darkness, I could hear the faintest scratching, like claws on frozen wood, circling me from a distance I couldn't measure. It wasn't just cold anymore. It was terror. And yet, something compelled me to keep following. Earl's fate had left a trail, and I needed to know what really happened out there. As I trudged further, the snow muffled most sounds, but I could hear something else. Low, guttural growls, far too deep for any wolf, echoing between the trees. Then came footsteps. Not mine, but heavy, dragging, circling me constantly. I stopped, listening intently. The air felt thicker, like it resisted my movement. I could hear breathing, not my own, something else's. I froze as a figure emerged briefly through the mist. Tall, pale, impossibly thin, with long limbs that bent wrong. It didn't run, it didn't move normally at all. Just watched me, as if deciding whether I belonged in this place. My flashlight flickered, and I stumbled back, snow spilling over the trail, and when I looked again, the figure was gone. Only the growls remained. For the first time, I understood why Earl never returned. The Yukon didn't just hide its dangers, it created them. And some of them were still watching, Following the distorted tracks, I arrived at a frozen lake. The ice was thick, yet I could see cracks spreading like veins, glowing faintly under the pale moonlight. Earl's journal had mentioned a lake, a place that hides secrets beneath the ice. But I had thought it was metaphorical. Standing there, I understood otherwise. The wind howled, carrying strange echoes that sounded almost like whispers in the distance. I noticed marks on the ice, scratches and handprints. But they didn't belong to a human. Something had skidded across the surface, scraping the snow in jagged arcs. My flashlight caught a glimpse of a figure under the ice, a silhouette frozen mid-step. I stumbled back, heart racing, realizing the ice had trapped something, or someone. A sudden cracking sound behind me made me spin. Snow fell from the trees, as if something large had passed overhead. I knew then that Earl's fate was more than an accident. Whatever claimed him wasn't natural. It was alive, patient, and still hunting. Hours later, exhausted and chilled to the bone, I stumbled upon a small log cabin. It looked abandoned for decades. Roof sagging, windows broken, but smoke was curling from the chimney. My instinct screamed to leave, yet something pulled me forward. Inside, I found signs of recent habitation. An overturned chair, a lantern still warm, and a wall etched with strange symbols that seemed to shift when I looked away. A faint scratching came from the corner of the room. I swung my flashlight and caught a glimpse of movement, shadows creeping unnaturally along the walls. Then I saw it, claw marks on the floorboards leading outside into the snowy wilderness. And then the whispers began, low and guttural, circling my head. Words I couldn't understand, but felt deeply threatening. I realized Earl might have reached this place. But what he encountered here had driven him into the forest, never to return. And now, the same presence was following me. As I continued deeper into the woods, the whispers grew louder. At first, they were faint, almost comforting, like a voice calling for help. Then they twisted into something malicious, repeating my name over and over. Every step forward felt heavier, as if the snow itself resisted me. I stumbled upon a clearing with a single, leafless tree. Hanging from its branches were old, frozen pieces of cloth, and beneath them, scattered bones. Some human, some not. My stomach turned as I realized Earl's journal entries had described similar scenes. Things hang from the trees, watching. I felt a gaze from the darkness behind me, a cold, intelligent presence studying me. Every instinct screamed to flee, but I was rooted to the spot, captivated by the horror unfolding around me. I understood why no one ever returned from the deepest Yukon wilderness. The forest was alive, and it didn't forgive intruders. Following the eerie whispers, I stumbled upon a narrow crevice between two jagged cliffs, partially hidden by snow and ice. Something compelled me to enter. Inside, the air was thick, suffocating, carrying the scent of damp earth and something far fouler I couldn't identify. My flashlight caught the walls, etched symbols primitive and chaotic, glowing faintly, pulsating like a heartbeat. Deeper in, I discovered remnants of a campsite, ashes of a long extinguished fire, an empty tin cup, and scattered personal items. Among them was a tattered piece of Earl's clothing, frozen solid, covered in scratches. The cave floor was littered with claw marks, and I realized something had dragged him here. A low growl reverberated from the shadows. I froze as two faint eyes reflected my flashlight, watching, intelligent, predatory. The walls seemed to close in, the air thickening. Every instinct screamed to flee, yet I couldn't leave. The forest had called me here, and whatever had claimed Earl wasn't done. I tried to retreat, but the cave entrance was gone. Fog and snow seemed to have shifted outside, erasing any familiar landmarks. That's when I felt it. Breathing close, a heavy presence moving silently behind me. I turned my flashlight toward the shadows and glimpsed movement. Long limbs that bent impossibly, skimming along the walls without touching the floor. My mind screamed to run, but the ground underfoot was slick with ice and frost, making every step treacherous. The growls grew louder, punctuated by clicks like bones cracking. I thought I saw Earl, or what remained of him, pressed against a wall, frozen in terror, his eyes wide with disbelief. The realization hit me. The forest didn't just consume the body, it toyed with the mind. Each step forward brought me closer to the unseen hunter, a predator patient and cunning. I had walked into its domain, and there was no turning back. I stumbled into a wider chamber, my flashlight trembling. In the center, a figure emerged. Tall, gaunt, pale, with eyes that reflected every ounce of fear in my soul. Its movements were jerky, unnatural, like something between a human and predator. I froze, unable to scream as it advanced slowly, each step deliberate, its gaze locking onto mine. Behind it, shadows twisted, forming shapes that resembled people, maybe past victims, writhing and distorted. The whispers returned, louder now, speaking in a language I didn't know but understood instinctively. Warnings, threats, promises of death. I realized Earl hadn't vanished. He had been claimed, his essence trapped somewhere between the forest and whatever lurked in its depths. I backed away, every step echoing against stone walls, the presence never breaking its gaze. The chamber seemed infinite, swallowing sound and light alike. Escape was a fragile hope, and I felt the cold hand of inevitability brushing against me. By sheer luck or desperation, I spotted a narrow fissure leading upward. I scrambled, chest heaving, snow and ice cutting my hands, the growls echoing behind me. The forest seemed to shift, trying to keep me inside, bending paths, twisting trees, erasing landmarks. As I emerged, the first rays of dawn barely touched the horizon. The cold air stung, but I was alive. Or at least I thought I was. Looking back, the cave and the forest behind it seemed different. The trees were darker, shadows longer, and the whispers lingered in the wind. I could no longer see the path I had taken, only an endless stretch of wilderness. Earl was gone, completely erased from this world, leaving behind only the chilling warning of his fate. I returned to civilization, carrying his journal and the memory of the horrors I witnessed. But the forest never left me. At night, I hear the whispers again, feel eyes watching from the dark, and know that what I encountered is patient, intelligent, and always waiting for the next intruder. The Yukon wilderness is not just wild. It is alive, malevolent, and unforgiving. And some stories are meant to vanish along with the lost. My name is Lucas, and this happened on my first solo trucking route through the Yukon. I had driven hundreds of miles before, but nothing prepared me for the frozen highway stretching endlessly beneath a sky smeared with dark clouds. The road was deserted, the snow thick, and every mile felt like stepping further into a different world. It was just past midnight when I noticed headlights flickering in the rearview mirror. At first, I thought it was another truck. But as the lights drew closer, their pattern was erratic, almost alive, dancing like they were toying with me. A chill ran down my spine. I tried to accelerate, but my truck responded sluggishly, the engine groaning under the ice-cold grip of winter. Suddenly, the lights vanished. My radio crackled, a distorted voice whispering my name over and over. Panic clawed at me, but curiosity, maybe fear itself, drove me forward. That was when I realized I wasn't alone on this highway, and whatever followed was watching, waiting, and hungry. Hours passed, and the darkness seemed unending. I decided to stop at a small rest area tucked between frozen pines. As I stepped out, the wind bit my face, carrying whispers through the trees. I noticed footprints leading away from the lot, fresh, too big to be human, and heading straight toward the shadows. I considered following them, reasoning that someone might be in trouble, but instinct screamed otherwise. The footprints stopped abruptly in the middle of the snow, as if the owner had vanished. My stomach twisted with unease. I returned to my truck, but the headlights I saw before were back, now stationary, watching. Sleep was impossible. Every shadow a threat, every gust of wind a whisper of something alive, stalking me. That night, I understood that the Yukon doesn't forgive wandering souls, especially those foolish enough to travel its frozen arteries alone. Around 3 a.m., fatigue and fear clawed at me. I spotted a faint light through the trees, a cabin, abandoned yet somehow inviting. I parked my truck and approached cautiously, the snow crunching under my boots like a countdown to something inevitable. The door creaked open with a push, revealing a room frozen in time. A table with rusted mugs, a fireplace long cold, and a coat draped over a chair as if someone had left in a hurry. I shivered and noticed scratches along the walls, deep and jagged, almost like talons had carved them. A sudden gust slammed the door behind me, plunging the cabin into darkness. My flashlight flickered, revealing something standing in the corner. A figure, tall, shrouded in shadows, face obscured. I tried to speak, but my voice caught in my throat. It didn't move, yet I felt its gaze pierce me. The whispers returned, echoing from every corner, telling me I was not welcome. I ran back to my truck, but the forest seemed alive, branches scraping like fingernails, warning me that leaving would not be simple. Back on the road, my nerves were shredded. Every mile seemed endless. The same erratic headlights appeared closer this time. My rearview mirror reflected a massive silhouette, elongated, humanoid, but distorted, moving faster than it should, almost gliding across the frozen asphalt. I floored the accelerator, the tires skidding, snow spraying, but the silhouette kept pace. My radio screeched, a chilling, static voice repeating, "You can't escape." I clenched the wheel as dread filled every vein. Ahead, a sharp curve emerged, cliffs on one side and a frozen drop on the other. My truck felt unnaturally heavy, resisting my commands as if the highway itself had turned against me. The headlights vanished again, replaced by a whispering wind carrying footsteps all around my vehicle. I realized I wasn't just being followed. Something was hurting me, driving me toward a fate I couldn't comprehend. Yet somehow, I was terrified to resist. Hours later, I spotted another rest stop, dimly lit and nearly buried in snow. I parked cautiously, hoping for safety, but the moment I stepped out, I realized the place was deserted in a way that felt unnatural. Snow had drifted in patterns, almost like runes, and a thin layer of frost-covered benches and vending machines. Footsteps crunched behind me. I spun around. Nothing. The wind seemed to carry voices, low and guttural, speaking words I couldn't understand, yet felt like a command. I saw a shadow moving behind the pumps, twisting, bending unnaturally, merging with darkness. Every instinct screamed that I should leave immediately. I rushed back to my truck, noticing for the first time a figure in the snow, a person, or at least what appeared human, lying motionless, half buried. As I approached, a hand twitched, clawing at the snow before stopping again. The highway was alive with secrets, each frozen mile holding stories of those who vanished into the icy grip of the Yukon. I managed to get back on the highway, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. The darkness seemed to thicken around me, pressing down as if the night itself wanted me gone. Ahead, I saw another truck, its trailer swaying unnaturally, yet no driver in sight. I blinked, and it vanished, leaving only a swirling fog behind. Panic overtook me. My GPS flickered, showing impossible routes through forests and icy cliffs that didn't exist. The radio crackled again, louder this time, voices overlapping in a grotesque chorus. "You're next." The snow under my tires seemed to shift like liquid ice, subtly steering my truck toward the cliffs. My eyes darted to the mirrors. I was surrounded by shadowy figures, hundreds, merging with the fog, some moving faster than thought itself. I realized with horror that these were not spirits or ghosts. They were entities that fed on fear, guiding me, testing me, laughing silently as the road twisted and warped under the Yukon's frozen grip. I spotted a tunnel ahead, carved through the frozen rock like a jagged mouth. Desperation drove me inside, thinking maybe it offered escape. The walls glimmered with frost, reflecting distorted shapes. The air was suffocating, heavy with the smell of metal and decay. Inside, the shadows multiplied, crawling along the walls, slithering like living frost. My headlights flickered, revealing scratches, deep gouges, as though countless trucks had entered, but none had left. I heard whispers from every direction, taunting me, some screaming my name, others silent yet oppressive. Suddenly, my truck hit a patch of ice so black it seemed bottomless. The vehicle slid violently, barely keeping me from plunging into darkness. The tunnel seemed endless, twisting in ways no natural formation should. Each bend revealed new horrors, frozen shapes pressed against the walls, faces twisted in silent screams, and eyes that glowed faintly in the frost. The tunnel stretched on for hours, yet time felt irrelevant. My radio sputtered, the static shaping into voices more human, but wrong. They begged, threatened, laughed. I heard names I had never heard, events I didn't live, yet they were addressed directly to me. My truck's engine coughed and died. Alone, stranded, I felt the temperature drop dramatically, frost forming inside the cab. The shadows outside condensed into humanoid forms, silent, watching. One leaned against the window, its face a blank void, yet I felt its stare pierce through my skull. I tried to start the engine again, panic taking control. The whispers became louder, almost tangible, pushing me to leave. Yet the tunnel seemed to stretch further into an infinite dark. Every instinct screamed that leaving this place alive was impossible. And yet, I had no choice but to try. Somehow, I regained control, and the truck lurched forward. The tunnel opened to a sharp curve outside, icy cliffs on one side, a frozen river below on the other. I saw the road ahead vanish into a blizzard, a wall of white swirling like teeth. The shadows from inside the tunnel followed, merging with the storm, creating forms that slithered over the snow, some lifting briefly, almost flying. The air was thick with freezing mist, each breath burning my lungs. I realized the highway itself had become alive, bending and warping reality, testing every ounce of my resolve. In that moment, I understood. The Yukon did not just hide horrors, it created them, feeding on fear, and the frozen highway was its predator's path. I prayed, gripping the wheel, hoping to survive the last curve and emerge from the nightmare. Somehow, I regained control, and the truck lurched forward. The tunnel opened to a sharp curve outside, icy cliffs on one side, a frozen river below on the other. I saw the road ahead vanish into a blizzard, a wall of white swirling like teeth. The shadows from inside the tunnel followed, merging with the storm, creating forms that slithered over the snow, some lifting briefly, almost flying. The air was thick with freezing mist, each breath burning my lungs. I realized the highway itself had become alive, bending and warping reality, testing every ounce of my resolve. In that moment, I understood. The Yukon did not just hide horrors, it created them, feeding on fear. And the frozen highway was its predator's path. I prayed, gripping the wheel, hoping to survive the last curve and emerge from the nightmare. My name is Jason, and I've been a long-haul trucker for over a decade. I've driven across deserts, mountains, and highways that never seemed to end. But nothing prepared me for what happened one frigid night in the Yukon. I was hauling a shipment of frozen goods from Whitehorse to Dawson City, a route I had driven countless times. The night was calm at first, a thin fog hugging the snow-covered road. But as midnight approached, I began to notice something odd, an eerie silence that felt unnatural. No wind, no wildlife. Just the faint hum of my engine, which suddenly seemed too loud, too intrusive in the stillness. Then I saw it. A truck ahead, parked on the side of the road with its lights off. Its silhouette was warped, as if the darkness itself clung to it. I slowed, curiosity mixed with unease. The closer I got, the more I realized something was very wrong. The truck had no driver, yet I could swear I heard breathing. A chill ran down my spine, and my radio crackled violently. A voice hissed my name. I slammed my hand on the wheel, unsure if I was losing my mind, or if something on this road wanted me to notice it. I couldn't shake the feeling that the truck ahead was alive. As I slowed, it suddenly turned on its lights, blinding me, though no driver was visible. Panic clawed at my chest. I tried to swerve, but the icy road made control impossible. The voice on the radio grew louder, distorted, almost chanting. I realized it was repeating phrases I had never heard, words that seemed to wrap around my mind like chains. My truck trembled, as if reacting to unseen hands pressing against the cab. Suddenly, the ghostly truck moved, not on the road, but floating slightly above it. Its wheels didn't touch the asphalt. The closer I got, the colder the air became, frost forming on my windshield, my breath visible in thick clouds. I slammed the brakes, but the truck behind me mirrored every movement, anticipating every reaction. I realized I was trapped in a loop, the Yukon night bending reality. The radio crackled again. "You can't leave? You belong here." I swallowed hard, gripping the wheel, trying to convince myself this was some hallucination caused by exhaustion. But deep down, I knew it was far worse. The fog thickened, swallowing the road ahead. Every passing tree seemed distorted, branches twisting unnaturally. Shadows emerged from the fog, tall, humanoid figures that didn't belong to any normal creature. Some moved alongside the truck, keeping pace effortlessly, their eyes glowing faintly. I turned my head in disbelief. The dashboard clock spun wildly, minutes stretching into hours, or perhaps collapsing into seconds. Time itself felt broken. The shadows whispered secrets in a language I didn't understand, yet somehow comprehended. The names of towns, streets, even events from my life. My heart pounded as I realized they weren't just watching, they were interacting. One shadow pressed a hand against the foggy window, leaving a frost pattern shaped like a handprint that seemed almost alive. I swerved instinctively, but the shadows simply mirrored my movements. Panic gave way to a cold, sinking terror. This night was not merely long. It was eternal, and the Yukon had claimed me for itself. I pressed on, hoping to escape, but the road seemed to stretch endlessly. The lines on the asphalt blurred, merging into the fog, and landmarks I knew vanished. Mile markers spun past and repeated. 23, 24, 23, 24. As if I were driving in circles through an impossible nightmare. The truck ahead pulsed with a dim, unnatural glow, as if it were a living entity guiding me deeper into the Yukon wilderness. My radio crackled again, and now I heard laughter, low, guttural, surrounding me from every direction. I slammed my hands against the steering wheel. "Who's there?" I shouted, but my voice vanished into the fog. Then I saw it. An abandoned rest stop ahead, lit with flickering neon, doors swinging in the wind. But when I parked and stepped out, I realized it was a hollow shell. Walls made of ice, windows showing scenes that weren't real. My childhood home, my high school, places I'd never been. The air smelled of decay, and whispers echoed from inside. I stumbled back into my truck, heart racing. The ghostly truck loomed closer, as if feeding on my fear, its engine emitting a sound like a growl. I realized then, the Yukon wasn't just a road. It was a predator. The road finally reappeared, but it was wrong. Trees bent in impossible angles, and snow shimmered with unnatural colors. My GPS spun uselessly, pointing me in circles. Every turn led me back to the ghostly truck, waiting patiently, lights dimming and flaring unpredictably. I caught a glimpse of something moving in the tree line. A person, or perhaps not a person. Its eyes glowed a deep crimson, reflecting my headlights, and it ran faster than any human could. When I blinked, it vanished, but then appeared directly in front of me on the road. I swerved violently, heart hammering. My mind screamed to stop, but my body refused. It was like driving underwater through a living nightmare. The air itself seemed viscous, sticky, filled with whispers, laughter, and the sound of grinding metal. The Yukon had transformed into a maze of fear, and there was no exit. I glanced in my rearview mirror, and my blood ran cold. The shadow truck was gone, but the road behind me had turned into a black void, swallowing the headlights' glow. Then I saw dozens of faces pressed against the mirror, hollow, pale, screaming silently. They were past drivers, I realized, trapped forever on this highway of nightmares. The voices returned, overlapping, whispering, mocking. Each name they called was someone I knew, alive or dead. My hands shook violently as I gripped the wheel. And suddenly, my own reflection twisted, smiling in a way I never had. The truck itself seemed to pulse, growl, and stretch like a living creature. I forced myself to focus on the road, but every landmark, every tree, every mile marker was wrong. The Yukon had become an endless loop, a liminal space between life and death, reality and nightmare. Escape seemed impossible, but I couldn't stop trying. I glanced in my rearview mirror, and my blood ran cold. The shadow truck was gone, but the road behind me had turned into a black void, swallowing the headlights' glow. Then I saw dozens of faces pressed against the mirror, hollow, pale, screaming silently. They were past drivers, I realized, trapped forever on this highway of nightmares. The voices returned, overlapping, whispering, mocking. Each name they called was someone I knew, alive or dead. My hands shook violently as I gripped the wheel. And suddenly, my own reflection twisted, smiling in a way I never had. The truck itself seemed to pulse, growl, and stretch like a living creature. I forced myself to focus on the road, but every landmark, every tree, every mile marker was wrong. The Yukon had become an endless loop, a liminal space between life and death, reality and nightmare. Escape seemed impossible, but I couldn't stop trying. The fog thickened until it was nearly solid. I could hear it whisper, whispering everything I had ever done, every secret I had hidden. Each breath I took felt like inhaling cold steel. Shadows moved inside the fog, forming shapes that reached for my truck, brushing the sides like spectral hands. Then, out of nowhere, the truck radio crackled, static forming words. "You're ours now?" My blood ran ice cold. The shadows outside multiplied, and I could feel their presence pressing in from all sides. My heart pounded, and my hands shook so violently I nearly lost control. I floored the gas, desperately trying to escape the fog, but it seemed to bend around me, following, constricting. The Yukon had become a living entity, aware, hunting me, feeding on my fear. I realized that running was pointless. The horror had claimed this stretch of highway, and it would not release me alive. I stumbled upon another rest stop, or maybe the same one, I couldn't tell. The neon lights flickered violently, casting distorted shadows that danced like monsters on ice walls. Inside, I saw the ghostly outlines of trucks, abandoned, but engines still running, headlights blazing into nothingness. A shadowy figure emerged from the fog, walking toward me slowly, deliberately. Its face was obscured, but its presence radiated malice. I tried to back up, but the truck refused to move. Tires stuck as if cemented to the asphalt. The whispers escalated into screams, echoing off the icy walls. It raised its arm, pointing at me. I saw my own worst memories flash in its direction, every regret, every fear. I realized then that Yukon didn't just trap you physically. It trapped your mind, your soul, your very essence. And once it had you, there was no leaving. I drove, or maybe floated, along the endless highway. The shadow truck never left my side, but it didn't attack. It watched, patient, almost satisfied. The road ahead stretched into darkness, impossibly long, and I felt myself slipping. My eyes blurred, body trembling, reality bending. I understood finally. The Yukon claimed those who ventured too far, those who drove alone into the dead of night. It was patient, cunning, a predator disguised as a road. Somewhere ahead, maybe forever away, a faint light shimmered. But whether it was salvation or a deeper trap, I could not know. All I could do was drive, heart pounding, every nerve screaming. And behind me, the shadow truck followed, always, in the Yukon's endless, frozen, haunted wilderness. I whispered a prayer and gripped the wheel, knowing that the road would never let me go. My name is Lucas, and this happened during the coldest stretch of the Yukon last winter. I was hauling a load of supplies from Whitehorse to Dawson City, and the road was nothing but ice and shadows under a full moon. Around midnight, I saw a lone figure at the roadside, a man waving frantically. Against my better judgment, I slowed down and stopped. He was dressed in tattered clothes, face obscured by frost and a thick scarf. His hands shook violently as he gestured me to let him in. I hesitated. Stories of highway ghosts ran through my mind. But something compelled me. I unlocked the passenger door, and he climbed in silently, eyes fixed straight ahead. As soon as he sat down, the temperature in the cabin plummeted. Frost formed on the inside of the windshield. Breath became visible, even though my heater was on full blast. He didn't speak, didn't blink, just stared. I tried to ask his name, where he was headed, but no sound came. Then, a whisper echoed. Not from him, but from the truck itself. "You shouldn't have stopped." The second I closed the door, the heater cut out. Frost crept along the dashboard and across my hands as I gripped the wheel. The stranger's face slowly emerged from the scarf, and I saw eyes that weren't human, black, endless, like two holes into another world. The radio crackled, static hissing before forming words. "Don't look behind you." My instincts screamed to obey, but curiosity and terror forced me to glance in the rearview mirror. The road behind was empty, except for a faint silhouette, growing larger, following every movement of the truck. It moved impossibly fast, keeping pace with me despite the slippery highway. I pressed the accelerator, tires spinning on ice. The truck felt heavier, as if gravity itself had doubled. The stranger finally whispered, his voice like cracking ice. "It's too late to turn back. They're coming." And at that moment, I realized that whatever was chasing me wasn't human, and it never would be satisfied. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time had warped. The stranger didn't speak, but occasionally pointed ahead. Each time, the fog thickened, and ghostly forms appeared at the edges of the headlights. Other drivers, faces twisted in terror, their hands pressed against invisible glass as if trapped in another dimension. I tried to swerve to avoid them, but the road seemed endless, bending unnaturally around mountains and ice fields. My own reflection in the side mirrors started moving independently, smirking, mocking, showing the worst moments of my life. I screamed, but only a hollow echo returned. The stranger finally muttered something I couldn't comprehend, yet somehow understood. Every trucker who helps them becomes part of the highway. "You will not leave a chill so deep it burned through bone" gripped me, and I realized the Yukon wasn't just a highway. It was a trap, alive, feeding on anyone alone at night. I spotted a small rest area sign, finally, an exit. Salvation, maybe. But as I approached, it dissolved into fog, leaving only the endless highway ahead. Panic surged. I swerved violently, tires sliding across ice. But no matter what I did, I couldn't escape. Suddenly, the stranger's hand shot out, grabbing the gear shift. The truck jerked violently, and the headlights caught glimpses of a frozen forest. Trees twisted, faces carved into trunks, mouths screaming silently. Every mile marker I passed had my name etched into it, glowing faintly in the snow. I realized the truth. The Yukon claimed its victims in silence, rewriting the rules of reality itself. There was no exit, no safe haven. Only the road, endless, and the shadows waiting for the next mistake. The stranger leaned back, finally smiling, and I understood that the nightmare had only just begun. The stranger remained silent, but the truck's cabin itself seemed alive. Shadows stretched and warped across the interior, moving independently of the moonlight outside. I could hear whispers, hundreds of them, each voice a distorted memory of a trucker who had vanished on this cursed highway. They spoke in unison, yet individually, layering fear into every nerve. I tried to ignore them, gripping the wheel tighter, but one voice became clear, eerily familiar. "Lucas, you shouldn't have stopped." My heart raced. I realized it wasn't the stranger. It was the voices of the dead, haunting, warning, or perhaps mocking me. The truck's engine roared unnaturally, as if alive, and frost crept inside like spider legs, wrapping around my arms. I glanced at the stranger. His eyes glowed faintly, blackness deeper than the night outside. He leaned toward me and whispered, "They follow everyone who helps. And now, they follow you." Time fractured. Headlights caught glimpses of figures darting between snowdrifts. Tall, impossibly thin, limbs bending wrong, faces frozen in silent screams. The highway wasn't just haunted, it was alive, feeding on fear, twisting reality around its victims. I glanced at the side mirrors, then froze. Reflections showed not the highway, but fragmented scenes of my life. Moments of regret, failures, and fear. Each shard of glass displayed a different death, each more terrifying than the last. I tried to look away, but the reflections pulled at my mind, a psychic grip that burned through my skull. The stranger remained calm, almost amused. "They record everything," he said, voice like cracking ice. "Every choice, every fear, every weakness. And soon, it will be your turn to become part of the highway." I stomped the brake, tires spinning uselessly on the ice. The rearview mirror revealed a massive figure emerging from the blizzard, a skeletal, inhuman driver, his eyes burning like embers, his hand reaching for my truck. I realized I was racing not against distance, but against inevitability itself. The headlights flickered, shadows lengthened, and the road seemed to stretch infinitely. Panic threatened to consume me completely as I understood. In the Yukon, no one survives the highway if it wants you. The snowstorm intensified. Visibility dropped to near zero. Trees bent unnaturally as if bowing to some invisible force. The stranger finally spoke again. "Listen carefully. The highway decides who lives." I realized then that every choice I'd made tonight, stopping, letting him in, had already been recorded. My fate was sealed. Suddenly, headlights illuminated dozens of shadowy figures emerging from the blizzard, moving against the wind, their faces blurred but screaming silently. Tires skidded, the truck fish-tailed. I tried to swerve, but the road bent unnaturally, turning into a frozen labyrinth that defied physics. The stranger pointed ahead. I saw a bridge, a rickety, ancient structure over a frozen river. It was the only path forward. But the figures surged closer, reaching out with skeletal hands. My breath froze. Fear rooted me in place. I had no choice but to drive onto the bridge, heart pounding, senses screaming. Every plank of the bridge creaked under the weight of the truck. The figures flanked both sides, silent but moving impossibly fast. Frost formed along the edges, and the wind carried whispers of past tragedies. I could feel hands brushing against the truck, ice cold, attempting to pull me down. The stranger leaned over, whispering into my ear. "Once you cross, there's no turning back." The bridge stretched endlessly, each plank cracking under invisible pressure. My hands shook as I gripped the wheel, knuckles white. And I realized that if I looked too long, I might see the souls trapped beneath the ice. Drivers who had vanished, now frozen forever. Suddenly, a figure lunged at the windshield from nowhere. I slammed on the horn. It dissipated into mist, but I knew it wasn't gone. The bridge had a will, alive, feeding on fear, testing my resolve. I had to survive, but the realization hit me. The Yukon didn't forgive mistakes. The storm around us howled louder, rattling the truck's frame as I fought to keep it steady. The bridge seemed to stretch into infinity, and every second dragged like hours. The stranger sat motionless beside me, but his presence felt heavier, darker. Finally, he spoke, calm, cold, final. "You've already crossed this bridge before, Lucas. You just don't remember." My chest tightened. "What are you talking about?" I demanded, but my voice cracked. He turned to me, and for the first time, his hood slipped back. His face wasn't human, it was my face. Pale, frostbitten, dead, eyes glazed with an eternal cold. I gripped the wheel tighter, but the truck began to slow, resisting my commands. The mirrors showed not the storm, but rows of trucks, abandoned, mangled, half-frozen, lined up endlessly on this same bridge. Every driver was still inside, staring forward with hollow eyes, trapped in a loop. The horrifying truth set in. This wasn't just a road. This was a purgatory for truckers who died on the Yukon, cursed to drive forever. And I was already part of it. The steering wheel locked in place, dragging me forward. My double, the phantom passenger, smiled faintly, then dissolved into frost and shadow, leaving nothing behind but a faint whisper. You'll remember, eventually. The bridge ended, but the road ahead didn't lead to safety. Instead, it split into countless ghostly highways, each one leading deeper into a horizon of blizzards, endless night, and despair. My headlights flickered, illuminating fleeting glimpses of other truckers, lost, frozen, condemned, forever driving parallel, forever silent. I screamed, slamming my fists on the wheel, but no sound came out. The storm swallowed everything. My body moved automatically, as if possessed, my hands gripping the wheel like they'd been carved there. The engine roared, not with fuel, but with the souls of the damned. I wasn't escaping the Yukon. I was the Yukon now. Another phantom, another whisper, another shadow waiting for the next lost driver foolish enough to stop for help. And when they do, I'll be sitting in the passenger seat, waiting. The desert stretched endlessly in every direction, a flat expanse of sand and rock under the unforgiving night sky. My rig groaned along Route 66, headlights carving a thin line through the darkness. The air was dry, suffocating, and the silence pressed against the windows like a living thing. I hadn't passed another vehicle for hours. No rest stops, no towns, just the monotony of desert highway. My eyes stung from fatigue, and every mile felt heavier than the last. That's when I saw it. An old, flickering neon sign, rising like a mirage from the sands. Silver Star Motel. It looked abandoned. Half the letters were burned out. The parking lot was cracked and overgrown with weeds, and the windows were dark. But my fuel gauge was kissing empty, and exhaustion clawed at me like a beast. Against my better judgment, I pulled in. The truck hissed as I parked, and the silence that followed was unnatural, too heavy, too complete. I climbed down, boots crunching on gravel, and walked toward the entrance. The glass doors creaked open at my touch, though no electricity should have powered them. Inside, the lobby was coated in dust. Faded carpet peeled up at the edges, and a broken chandelier hung precariously from the ceiling. Behind the counter sat an old bell, untouched but polished, as if waiting for someone to ring it. I hesitated, then tapped the bell. The sound echoed unnaturally long, reverberating through the motel like a scream. Somewhere deep in the building, a door clicked shut. "Hello?" I called, my voice shaking slightly. No answer. That's when I noticed the guest book on the counter. The names written inside weren't just old. They were decades old. The last entry was from 1972, and every single name was crossed out in red ink. A cold draft slithered across my neck, though every window was shut. The silence grew unbearable, pressing into my ears like static. My gut screamed to leave, but my legs moved on their own, dragging me deeper into the hallway lined with peeling wallpaper and flickering bulbs. Half the doors were locked, their numbers scratched off, but one stood wide open at the very end. Room 6. The bed inside was neatly made, sheets crisp and white, as if waiting for me. On the nightstand sat a keychain with the motel's logo and the number 66 engraved in rusted metal. But what froze me wasn't the bed. It was the framed photograph on the wall. It showed me my truck, parked right outside the motel. Only the date scrawled in the corner was 1972. The air inside room 6 was stale, thick with the scent of mildew and something metallic, like rust or blood. My fingers trembled as I set the photograph back on the nightstand. The silence pressed harder, but beneath it, I began to hear something faint. At first, it sounded like the creak of pipes. Then whispers. Dozens of voices, muffled, overlapping, leaking from inside the walls. They weren't speaking clearly. They were chanting, repeating the same phrase, low and hollow, in a language I didn't understand. I pressed my ear against the wallpaper. The wall throbbed with warmth, like a living pulse. And then, something knocked back. Not once, not random. 3 times. Slow, deliberate, the whispers went silent. And then, in the quiet, a woman's voice hissed directly into my ear, though no one was there. You checked in, but you'll never leave. I staggered back into the hallway, heart pounding. The corridor stretched longer than before, as if the building had grown. Doors lined both sides, dozens of them, all slightly ajar. The dim bulbs buzzed overhead, casting long, unnatural shadows across the carpet. One door creaked open wider as I passed. Inside, I glimpsed movement, figures shifting in the dark. Pale faces leaned forward, watching me. I stumbled backward, but every door opened at once. Silent figures filled the thresholds. Men, women, even children. Their eyes were hollow, skin gray, mouths moving in perfect unison as they whispered that same phrase I had heard before. Their feet never moved, yet somehow they followed me down the hall, closer and closer, until the buzzing bulbs began to explode one by one, plunging the motel into a crawling darkness. At the very end of the hall, a single exit sign glowed red, pulsing like a heartbeat. I ran for it. I slammed through the exit door, expecting the cold desert night. Instead, I stumbled into the lobby again. The chandelier overhead was swaying violently, as if someone had just brushed past it. The guest book lay open on the counter, but now a fresh line of red ink had appeared. My name, written neatly, then crossed out. My legs gave out. I collapsed against the counter, shaking. And that's when I saw him. Behind the counter, where the shadows were thickest, a man stood. Tall, dressed in a moth-eaten suit, his face pale and cracked like old porcelain. His eyes glowed faintly yellow in the dark, and his mouth curled into a grin that showed far too many teeth. "Welcome to the Silver Star," he said in a voice that rattled my bones. "We've been waiting for you." I staggered backward from the counter, my eyes locked on the man with the porcelain face. His grin never wavered, but his body began to dissolve, slowly breaking apart into black mist that drifted toward the hallway. The air grew heavy, suffocating. I heard the doors creak open again. Only this time, the rooms weren't just doors, they were mouths. The frames warped into jagged teeth-like edges, wallpaper stretching like gums. The hall pulsed as if alive, the entire building inhaling and exhaling around me. A low moan rattled through the floorboards, vibrating up my legs. I could feel something deep beneath the motel, moving, stirring, like a giant creature trapped under the foundation. The man's voice echoed all around me, though his body was gone. "Every guest feeds the house. You've already given it what it wants." My stomach turned ice. I realized I hadn't seen my truck outside since entering, and my reflection in the lobby mirror wasn't mine anymore. Desperate, I bolted past the shifting rooms, searching for another way out. That's when I noticed a trap door behind the front desk, half hidden beneath a torn rug. The handle was rusted but warm, like it had been touched recently. Against every screaming instinct, I pulled it open. A staircase spiraled down into blackness, the smell of damp earth and rot wafting upward. As I descended, the chanting began again. Those same voices from the walls, louder, layered, reverberating in my skull. My flashlight flickered, illuminating carvings along the stone walls, symbols of sacrifice, eyes etched over, and tally marks scratched deep into the rock. Hundreds of them. At the bottom, I entered a massive chamber lit by candles. The floor was covered with discarded belongings, clothes, wallets, shoes, each coated in dust. Dozens of figures stood in a circle, motionless, their faces pale and slack, eyes staring straight ahead. And in the center, a gaping hole in the earth breathed like a lung. Something enormous moved beneath. The circle of figures slowly turned their heads toward me, their movements jerky and wrong, as if their bones were grinding inside their flesh. One by one, their mouths opened, but no sound came. Instead, black smoke poured out of their throats, rising like a funnel into the ceiling. The ground shook. The breathing hole widened, its edges cracking as though the earth itself was splitting open. Something colossal shifted beneath the dirt, straining to break free. I saw fragments. Gray skin stretched over muscle, a hand with too many fingers pressing against the soil. Then the porcelain-faced man reappeared behind me, whispering directly into my ear. "You didn't check out in time. Now you belong to it?" The crowd of husks reached toward me, their hands ice cold, pulling me toward the pit. My screams were swallowed by the roar rising from below, the guttural bellow of something that had been starving for centuries. I thrashed wildly, kicking free from their grip, clawing toward the stairs. The porcelain man's laughter followed me, echoing inside my skull. I burst into the lobby, gasping for air. The motel was silent now, perfectly normal, as though nothing had happened. The key rack hung neatly behind the desk. The front door stood open. I stumbled outside, desperate to find my truck. But the parking lot was empty. No vehicles, no road, just endless desert stretching in every direction. I spun around. The motel was gone. Nothing but sand beneath the moonlight. My hands shook violently, clutching the key still clenched in my fist. Number 6. And then, headlights flared in the distance. A long, empty highway appeared where the desert had been. A sign glowed faintly in the night. "Welcome to Route 66 Motel, vacancy." The lights swallowed me whole. I never checked out. My name is Hank Dalton, and I've been a long-haul trucker for nearly 25 years. I've crossed the United States more times than I can count, but nothing, and I mean nothing, compares to the Yukon. The ice roads up there feel like you're driving across the bones of the earth. Endless frozen rivers stretch into black horizons, where the moonlight glitters on the ice like broken glass. It's beautiful, yes, but it's also unforgiving. If your truck breaks down out there, you're done. One winter night, I was hauling a shipment of diesel drums from Whitehorse to Dawson City. The temperature had dropped to minus 45 degrees, and the air itself felt like it could shatter in my lungs. The CB radio was silent. No chatter, no company. Just me and the hum of the engine against the groaning creaks of ice beneath my tires. That was when I saw them. Headlights. Dozens of them, glowing faintly in the distance, spread across the horizon like a convoy of ghosts. At first, I thought I was seeing things. My headlights reflected off the ice in strange ways sometimes, especially when fatigue started creeping in. But the more I looked, the clearer it became. Those weren't tricks of the light. There were trucks ahead of me. Big rigs, all lined up in formation, rolling silently across the ice road. The strange thing was, they weren't moving the way normal trucks did. Their headlights glowed a dim, yellowish white, almost too weak to cut through the darkness, but bright enough for me to count them. At least 10 trucks in that convoy, maybe more. I grabbed the CB radio and tried hailing them. "Breaker 19, you boys up ahead got your ears on? This is Hank, hauling north out of Whitehorse. You seeing me behind you?" Static, no voices, no crackle, no response at all. Just that cold, empty hiss of dead air. I pushed my truck a little harder, closing the distance. The convoy didn't react. They didn't slow down, didn't speed up. They just kept moving in eerie synchronization, their tires leaving no tracks on the ice. And that's when the real chill hit me. The ice roads always tell a story. You can look behind any truck and see the grooves of its tires pressed deep into the frost. But when I looked at the convoy ahead, the ice was perfectly smooth, as if those trucks weren't even touching the road. My heart began to pound. This wasn't a convoy of living truckers. This was something else entirely. I couldn't shake the gnawing urge to get closer. Curiosity has killed more truckers than bad weather, but in that moment, it was stronger than fear. I downshifted, the diesel engine growling louder as I gained speed. The convoy remained steady, too steady. No wobbling trailers, no drifting lanes, no brake lights flickering. It was like watching a choreographed march of giants. The cold inside my cab seemed to intensify. I glanced at my thermometer. Outside temperature had dropped nearly 15 degrees in less than 5 minutes. My breath came out in long, pale clouds, even though the heater was cranked all the way up. Finally, I was close enough to make out details. Their rigs were wrong. Old, rusted cabs with logos from companies that had shut down decades ago. One bore the faded emblem of Northern Star Freight, a company I knew had gone under in the early 70s after half their fleet vanished on an ice road run. Another was missing a windshield altogether, yet the driver's seat was occupied. At least I thought it was. Shapes sat behind the wheels, slumped forward, hands locked onto steering wheels. I couldn't see faces, just the suggestion of figures, silhouettes too stiff, too unmoving to be alive. I gripped the CB again, desperate. "Northern Star Freight? Anyone? Come on, fellas, answer up." Nothing, not even static this time, just dead silence. And then one of the trucks flickered, literally flickered, like an old film reel stuttering in the projector. For a split second, it vanished completely, then reappeared yards ahead. My mouth went dry. These weren't truckers. These weren't machines. It was a convoy of ghosts, trapped in a frozen march they couldn't escape. For the first time in years of driving the Yukon, I considered slamming the brakes and turning back. But something in me, curiosity, stupidity, maybe both, made me push forward. That's when the lead truck's brake lights suddenly flared, glowing red against the icy night. The entire convoy slowed in unison, as though they had finally noticed me trailing behind. And my blood turned to ice. The brake lights ahead glared like glowing eyes in the fog, bleeding red across the icy road. The entire line of rigs slowed down in perfect synchronization, their trailers swaying as though guided by invisible strings. I instinctively let off the accelerator, my own rig coasting down to match their speed. That's when I noticed something else. Their wheels weren't spinning, at least not like they should have been. The tires touched the ice, but there was no spray, no crunch, no sound of traction. They floated just above the surface, casting faint shadows where rubber should have met ice. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to turn around, but my hands felt glued to the wheel. I could only watch as the lead truck veered slightly to the side, carving a path toward a narrow detour off the main road. The rest of the convoy followed, each one turning at the exact same angle, like mirrored reflections. And then, as if daring me, the last truck in line slowed even further, just enough that I would have to choose. Either pull alongside and join their eerie parade, or slam the brakes and be left alone in the void of the Yukon night. I muttered under my breath, "This is insane. This is insane." Yet I found myself easing forward. The side of the last trailer loomed next to me, its rust-streaked walls pitted with dents, paint flaking like dried blood. My headlights illuminated faint handprints smeared across the metal, too small to belong to truckers. I shuddered. Children? Out here? A flash of white in my mirror snapped me back. Someone, or something, was visible in the back window of the trailer cab. A pale face, hollow sockets where eyes should have been. I swerved slightly, nearly losing control on the ice. My heart hammered so loud it drowned out the rumble of the engine. The convoy wasn't just slowing, it was inviting me in. Against every survival instinct I'd honed over years of trucking, I pulled my rig in line with them. The moment I did, the world seemed to shift. The howl of the wind outside dulled, as though muffled by an invisible barrier. My CB, once dead silent, crackled to life with faint whispers. Not words, just distorted breaths, layered like a chorus of the damned. I gripped the mic with trembling hands. "Who are you? What do you want?" The only reply was a long exhale, followed by a sound like metal scraping across bone. Ahead of me, the lead truck's brake lights pulsed in a rhythm. 2 flashes, pause, 1 long glow. Over and over again. A signal? A warning? My mind raced, trying to decode it. But the hypnotic repetition started to lull me, like a heartbeat in the dark. I shook myself awake when I realized my own rig was mimicking them. My brake lights flickered in the same pattern, though I hadn't touched the pedal. The dashboard lights dimmed, then surged back to life, the gauges spinning wildly as though possessed. "Stop this!" I yelled into the void, slamming the heel of my hand against the wheel. "Get out of my truck!" But the whispers only grew louder, coiling in my ears, overlapping until they formed a word I couldn't mistake. "Join." A cold sweat broke across my forehead. I twisted the wheel to veer away from the convoy, but it wouldn't budge. My rig stayed locked in perfect formation, trapped between 2 ghostly trailers that hemmed me in like prison walls. And then I saw them. Faces pressed against the windows of the trailers, men, women, children, their mouths wide in silent screams, skin gray and translucent, eyes blackened pits. Dozens of them watching me, pleading with me. The whispers turned into laughter. Cruel, mocking, endless. I realized too late that I wasn't following the convoy anymore. It was pulling me. The highway stretched endlessly, swallowed by the horizon. Yet something about it didn't feel right anymore. Alex noticed that the streetlights ahead flickered unnaturally, as if they were glitching in and out of existence. One moment the road was illuminated, the next it was swallowed by complete blackness. In the rearview mirror, his heart almost stopped. Behind him, the outline of a horse-drawn hearse, the kind from the 1800s, was moving along the asphalt, completely silent. Its wheels didn't make a sound, and the horses pulling it weren't horses at all. They were skeletal, their hollow eyes glowing faint green in the dark. Alex pressed the gas harder, but the hearse seemed to glide effortlessly, always staying the same distance away, never closer, never farther. The only sound he could hear was the faint tolling of a distant funeral bell, echoing through the night air with each flicker of the lights. Fear turned into pure panic when Alex realized the road signs he passed were all blank, as if the world ahead had been erased. He wasn't driving through America anymore. He was driving through something else's domain. Alex tried to call someone, anyone, but his phone displayed only one name on the screen: passenger. His trembling thumb hovered above it, unsure, but before he could react, the call connected on its own. A deep, hollow voice answered, "Slow down. We're almost there." At that moment, Alex's eyes flicked to the passenger seat beside him. His veins turned to ice. A man in a black suit and wide-brimmed hat was sitting calmly, hands folded, watching the road ahead. His skin was pale like wax, his eyes completely black, and his lips stretched into a faint grin. "Don't be afraid," the figure whispered. "I've been riding with you all along. You just didn't notice until now." Alex swerved violently, nearly crashing. But when he looked again, the seat was empty. His heart hammered like a drum. But deep down, he knew the figure wasn't gone. It was simply waiting. Then the hearse behind him let out a deafening creak, and for the first time, Alex heard voices. Hundreds of whispers chanting his name, as if calling him to join. The fuel gauge, despite being full earlier, suddenly dropped to empty. The car sputtered, coughed, and rolled to a stop in the middle of the deserted road. Silence followed, broken only by the slow, deliberate sound of footsteps outside. Alex dared to look. Standing at the front of his car was the man in the black suit, hat casting a shadow over his eyeless face. Behind him, the skeletal horses and the hearse waited patiently, the rear door swinging open. "Your ride is over," the man said softly. "Time to come with us." Alex locked the doors, screaming into the empty night. But when he turned to the passenger seat again, it wasn't empty anymore. The man was already inside, sitting inches from him, whispering, "You never drive alone at night. You just never realize who's with you." The headlights of his car died. Darkness consumed everything. The next morning, when state troopers drove along that stretch of highway, they found Alex's car abandoned, engine cold. His phone lay on the seat, still displaying the name of the last call: passenger, duration, forever. And Alex? He was never seen again. It was close to 3 a.m. when Richard pulled his semi into a desolate rest stop off Interstate 80. The night had been long, the miles endless, and the highway stretched behind him like an endless black ribbon. His eyes burned from fatigue, and he thought a quick stop would help. Stretch his legs, grab a coffee from the vending machine, maybe smoke a cigarette before pushing on. But as soon as he parked, Richard noticed how unnaturally quiet the rest stop was. No other trucks, no cars, not even the distant hum of the highway. Just silence. The kind of silence that pressed against your ears made you realize how alone you really were. The fluorescent lights above the bathrooms buzzed faintly, flickering like they hadn't been serviced in years. The vending machine's glow seemed the only source of life, humming softly in the otherwise empty lot. Richard stepped out, boots crunching against the gravel, and immediately felt as though someone was watching him. His skin prickled, and his instincts, the instincts of a man who had driven the roads for over 2 decades, screamed at him to get back inside the truck. But fatigue made him stubborn. "Just 5 minutes," he muttered. "That's all." As he lit his cigarette, he saw movement at the edge of the woods. A shadow. Not a person, not quite. But something tall, thin, and shifting between the trees, as if it were made of the darkness itself. Richard froze, the cigarette trembling in his hand. The shadow stopped too, watching, trying to convince himself it was his imagination. Richard walked to the vending machine. His reflection in the glass looked pale and exhausted, but when he pressed the button for coffee, The machine sputtered and groaned. Instead of coffee, the slot dropped a crumpled piece of paper. He bent down, confused, and picked it up. Written in shaky black ink were the words, "Don't stay. He watches." Richard's blood ran cold. He spun around, heart hammering. But the lot was still empty. At least, that's what he thought. Until he saw the silhouette of a man standing by the bathroom door. The figure was tall, dressed in dark clothes, and wearing what looked like a wide-brimmed hat that obscured his face. He didn't move, didn't speak. Just stood there, hands at his sides, as if waiting. "Hey," Richard called out, trying to sound braver than he felt. "You okay?" The man didn't respond. The fluorescent light above him flickered violently, and for a split second, Richard swore the figure wasn't human at all. Its arms looked too long, its head tilted at an unnatural angle, and its shadow stretched across the ground like it had a life of its own. Richard stumbled backward, the paper still clutched in his fist. The cigarette fell from his lips. He didn't even notice. His instinct screamed louder now. Leave. Get back in the truck. Drive. But the figure by the bathroom door slowly began to move forward. Each step deliberate, echoing against the concrete as though the sound was amplified by the night itself. Richard's breath fogged in the cold night air as the figure advanced. Something about its gait was wrong. The footsteps were heavy, echoing, but its body seemed to glide more than a walk, like the steps didn't match the movement. His heart slammed against his ribs. He staggered back toward his truck, fumbling for his keys. Each time the light flickered, the figure seemed closer than before, crossing impossible distances between blinks of the buzzing lamps. "Get in the truck, Richard," he muttered. "Just get in the damn truck." When he finally reached the door handle, he risked a glance back. The man, or whatever it was, had stopped, but its shadow hadn't. The shadow kept stretching, crawling across the lot like a black liquid, reaching for him. Richard yanked open the door and climbed inside, slamming it shut. He jammed the keys into the ignition. The engine roared, headlights cutting across the lot. But instead of illuminating the stranger, the lights revealed nothing. The lot was empty, completely empty. The shadow was gone. The man was gone. Only the paper in Richard's trembling hand reminded him that what he saw wasn't just a dream. Trying to steady his nerves, Richard grabbed his phone. There was no service, but oddly enough, the call screen lit up on its own. One name appeared across the display in glowing white letters. Unknown. The phone vibrated violently, as though it wanted him to answer. Against every instinct screaming at him, Richard pressed accept. Static filled his ear at first. Then a voice, low, guttural, not quite human, slithered through. "Why, did you stop?" it asked. Richard dropped the phone like it had burned him. The call ended instantly, the screen going black. His hands shook as he picked it back up, desperate for some explanation. No call record, no missed number, just nothing. Before he could process it, the vending machine in the lot rattled violently, as if something inside was trying to claw its way out. The glass cracked down the middle, and a single can rolled free, hissing as it burst open on the pavement. The fizzing echoed like whispers. Richard started to cry without realizing it. His truck felt like a coffin. The night pressed against the windows. He wanted to leave, but something inside told him the moment he tried, the shadow would follow. Against better judgment, Richard glanced at the bathrooms again. The light above the men's restroom door flickered in a strange rhythm, on, off, not random. It felt like a signal. Through the grimy window of the bathroom, he saw movement. A pale face pressed against the glass for just a moment, eyes wide, mouth open in a silent scream. Then it was gone. Richard swore under his breath, torn between fear and disbelief. Who else would be out here at 3 a.m.? Then, the bathroom door creaked open. Not slammed, not shoved, just creaked, slow and deliberate, like someone inviting him in. The smell hit him first, sour and metallic, like rust mixed with rot. The voice from his phone echoed in his head. "Why did you stop?" And then another whisper, softer, coming from the bathroom itself. "Come inside." Richard's stomach turned. He gripped the steering wheel with white knuckles, fighting the urge to throw the truck in reverse and floor it. But curiosity, horrible, dangerous curiosity, gnawed at him. Finally, he snapped. He couldn't sit still anymore. He grabbed his flashlight and opened the truck door. The second his boots hit the ground, the night seemed to grow heavier, like the air itself thickened around him. The gravel crunched as he walked toward the bathroom. His flashlight beam jittered with his shaking hands. At first, the pavement was clean, but then he noticed it. Dark stains leading toward the open door. A trail. The closer he got, the clearer it became. The stains weren't just oil or water. They were thick, dark patches. Blood. His throat tightened as he approached the entrance. His flashlight beam swept across the walls, streaked with smears that looked like desperate handprints dragging down the tile. The air was damp and heavy. Somewhere inside, water dripped steadily. Then he saw it. A message scrawled across the inside of the wall in something dark and dried. "We never leave." Richard stumbled backward, his light shaking across the tiled floor. The door slammed shut behind him with a deafening bang. Richard spun around, shoving at the door, but it wouldn't budge. His flashlight beam flicked across the bathroom stalls, 5 in a row, all closed. And then, one by one, they began to whisper. At first, it was faint. Hissing, murmurs. Then words formed, overlapping in different voices, men, women, children. "He's here." He stopped, just like us. Another one for the road. Richard's knees nearly gave out. His mind screamed to block his ears, but his body froze. The whispers grew louder, filling the entire room like a chorus of the damned. The final stall at the end creaked open. His flashlight caught something inside, a figure hunched over, long black hair dripping as though it were soaked. Its face lifted slowly, revealing hollow eyes and a mouth sewn shut with black thread. Richard dropped the flashlight. Darkness swallowed the room. Blind panic took over. He ran, slamming against the bathroom door with his shoulder. It burst open, throwing him into the cold night air. He scrambled to his feet and sprinted for his truck, gasping for breath. Behind him, the whispers spilled out of the bathroom like smoke, carrying on the wind. He dared not look back, but the sound followed him, closer and closer, until he felt hot breath on his neck. He dove into the cab, slammed the door, and turned the key. The truck roared to life. He threw it into gear and peeled out of the lot, tires squealing, gravel spraying. But as the truck sped down the highway, he checked the mirrors. His blood ran cold. The shadow was in the back seat. Richard swerved, nearly running off the road. "Get out! Get out!" he screamed, slamming his fist against the steering wheel. But the shadow didn't move like a person. It shifted and stretched, filling the entire cab like smoke with glowing eyes peering from the darkness. He hit the brakes, but the truck didn't slow. The pedal was stiff, unresponsive. The engine howled as if controlled by something else. The radio flickered on without him touching it. Static at first, Then the same guttural voice from before. "You belong to the road now." Richard's vision blurred. The headlights stretched into infinity. The asphalt beneath the tires no longer felt like earth. It felt like an endless void. His GPS screen glitched, showing one word flashing over and over. Nowhere. The next morning, another trucker pulled into the same rest stop. He parked, got out, and frowned at what he saw. A semi sat idling in the corner of the lot, lights still on, engine rumbling. He called out, but no one answered. The cab was empty. The driver's seat was vacant. Coffee still steamed in the cup holder, a cigarette half smoked in the ashtray. The only thing left on the passenger seat was a crumpled piece of paper. Written in shaky black ink were the words, "Don't stay. He watches." My name is Ethan, and I've been trucking the Yukon highways for nearly 2 decades. Up here, the roads are endless, and the silence can be deafening. If you've ever driven these routes, you know how unforgiving they can be. The forests swallow the light, the snow muffles the world, and sometimes you feel like you're the only living thing for hundreds of miles. But one winter night, I learned just how wrong that feeling is. I was hauling late, pushing past Whitehorse, when a storm forced me to take a detour. The snow hammered the windshield, and visibility dropped to nothing. My GPS rerouted me down an old logging road, the kind of road that doesn't even look real, just 2 deep ruts cut into endless forest. A few miles in, I spotted something through the swirling snow. A cabin. It was dark, old, but still standing. Relief washed over me. Maybe I could wait out the storm, warm up, and get back on the road at dawn. But when I pulled up, I noticed something strange. Despite the heavy snow, there were no drifts piled against the cabin door. No icicles, no frost. Like the place didn't belong to the storm around it. I parked the truck and grabbed my flashlight. The storm's howls seemed to die the moment I stepped outside, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. My boots crunched through the snow as I approached the cabin. The door swung open before I even touched it. Inside, the air was warm. Not cozy warm, stifling. Like stepping into a room where someone had been breathing heavy for too long. My light cut across the interior. Dust-choked furniture, an old iron stove, peeling wallpaper. Everything looked abandoned, except for the rocking chair. It moved, slowly back and forth, as though someone had just risen from it. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. I should have turned around then, walked back into the storm and taken my chances on the highway. But something about the warmth of that cabin held me in place, like invisible hands pushing me deeper inside. My flashlight beam shook as I pointed it toward the back room. The door was cracked open, just enough to see the edge of a bed inside. Dust floated in the beam like ash, and then the sound came again. A heavy footstep, then another. Slow, deliberate. Someone was standing in that room. I swallowed hard, reached for the door handle, and nudged it open. The bed was empty. The room was empty. Just a broken dresser and a cracked mirror leaning against the wall. But in the mirror, I saw my truck outside, headlights still on, exhaust spilling into the air, and behind it, something standing in the snow. Tall, thin, its head tilted, like it was staring directly into the mirror, at me. I stumbled back, nearly dropping the flashlight. When I looked again, the figure was gone. Just empty snow in the reflection. I wanted to leave, but curiosity clawed at me. On the dresser, half buried in dust, lay a leather-bound journal. The pages were yellowed and brittle, but the handwriting was still legible. The first few entries were mundane, logging trips, hunting notes, complaints about the cold. But then they changed. The man in the woods watches me. He doesn't come closer, but he's always there. The storm hasn't stopped in days. He's standing outside again. I can't sleep. I tried to leave, but every road leads back here. The cabin won't let me go. The final entry was scrawled in frantic, jagged letters. He's inside. I slammed the journal shut, heart pounding. The storm outside howled louder, rattling the windows, but when I stepped back into the living room, it was silent. Too silent. The rocking chair was moving again. Not slowly this time. Rocking hard, back and forth, creaking like it would snap in two. I aimed my flashlight and froze. Someone was sitting in it, but the figure wasn't solid. Its body was like smoke, shifting, head tilted at that same inhuman angle I'd seen in the mirror. Eyes, if they were eyes, glowed faintly like embers. The chair stopped rocking. The thing slowly turned its head toward me and smiled. I bolted for the cabin door. My boots slammed against the warped wood floor, the beam of my flashlight cutting wild arcs across the room. But when I grabbed the handle and pulled, it didn't budge. The door was stuck. No, not stuck, held. My breath fogged the air as I yanked harder, slamming my shoulder against it. Nothing. Behind me, the sound of creaking floorboards drew closer. Step. Step. I spun. The figure wasn't in the chair anymore. The cabin was empty, or so I thought. My flashlight beam swept across the ceiling and landed on it. It was crawling along the beams, its limbs bent backward, its head hanging upside down, watching me with those ember-like eyes. The thing dropped from the ceiling with a soundless thud. I ran for the only other escape I could see, a narrow staircase leading down into the basement. I know, basements are never the answer, but survival makes you desperate. The stairs groaned as I barreled down into darkness. The air grew colder, damp, carrying the stink of mold and something metallic. Blood. My flashlight cut through the dark, revealing walls lined with strange carvings, circles, symbols. Words scratched into the wood over and over again. He is the storm. In the center of the basement stood a table. On it, a half-melted candle flickered weakly. Around it, scattered bones. Animal, maybe human. The thing was nowhere in sight. But the carvings, they pulsed, like they were breathing. And then the candle went out. The darkness was alive. I swear I could hear whispers curling around me, words I couldn't understand. My flashlight sputtered, the beam weakening like the batteries were draining far too fast. "Leave," a voice whispered. It wasn't human. It was layered, like a dozen voices speaking at once. The beam caught movement near the far wall. At first, I thought it was just shadows shifting. But then I realized the wall itself was moving. The carvings writhed, twisting into faces that screamed silently, mouths stretched wide. And then I felt breath on my neck. I whipped around, and there it was, face inches from mine. Smoke and shadow, glowing eyes boring into me. "Leave," it whispered again. Only this time, it smiled wider, showing rows of jagged, too long teeth. I dropped the flashlight and bolted up the stairs. The door at the top flew open this time, slamming against the wall. I stumbled into the storm, lungs burning. But the cabin wasn't gone. It stood there behind me, lights glowing in the windows now, warm and inviting, like it wanted me back inside. And then I saw it, in the snow standing beside my truck. The figure taller now, sharper. It lifted one arm and pointed at me. The storm howled louder, spinning snow into a cyclone around the cabin. My instincts screamed at me to run. But where? The road was gone, swallowed by the storm, and in my head, I heard its voice. Not a whisper this time. A roar. Stay! I don't remember how I escaped. One moment I was standing there, frozen, the storm swallowing me whole. The next, I was behind the wheel, engine roaring, barreling down a road that hadn't been there before. When the storm cleared at dawn, I was back on the main highway. No cabin, no figure, just endless white wilderness. I tried to convince myself it was a nightmare. But when I checked my truck later that day, I found something carved into the inside of the driver's side door. A single phrase etched deep into the metal. You came back. I haven't taken that route since. But sometimes, when the Yukon storms howl at night, I swear I can hear the creak of that rocking chair, waiting. The rain was coming down in heavy sheets, blurring my windshield as I drove along a forgotten stretch of highway in the middle of nowhere. It was past midnight. The world around me drowned in darkness, except for the faint glow of my headlights. My GPS had long lost its signal, and the road signs looked rusted, broken, and almost unreadable. I was running low on gas, my phone battery barely hanging on at 10%. The storm made the silence heavier, broken only by the rhythmic thumping of the wipers and the occasional roll of thunder. Just when I thought I might have to pull over on the side of the road, a faint neon light flickered ahead. A motel sign barely visible through the curtain of rain. The glowing words read, Highway Rest Motel. The letters buzzed and sputtered, some broken, as if they hadn't been replaced in decades. I pulled into the empty parking lot, puddles of water reflecting the pale red neon glow. The place looked deserted. The building itself was small, boxy, and painted in peeling white, with curtains drawn across each window. Inside the reception, the smell of mildew and damp carpet clung to the air. The dim overhead light flickered, buzzing faintly. Behind the counter sat an old man with pale, sagging skin and watery eyes that didn't blink enough. His voice was hoarse when he finally spoke. You look tired, son. Storm's bad tonight. One night's all you'll need here. There was something unsettling about his smile, something that didn't quite reach his eyes. I signed the register, my pen scratching across the faded paper, but then I noticed the last entry before mine was dated 1978. The old man handed me a brass key attached to a large wooden block. Room 6. The hallway leading to it was dimly lit. The carpet stained with watermarks that looked too dark to be just age. Inside, the room smelled faintly of rot and damp smoke. The wallpaper was peeling, the lamp's shade torn. But what unsettled me most was the mirror, a tall, cracked one opposite the bed. Its reflection seemed darker than it should have been, as if the light didn't quite reach inside it. When I turned off the lamp and lay down, the storm outside roared louder. Somewhere down the hallway, I swore I heard footsteps, slow, dragging, and deliberate. At around 3:12 a.m., I woke to the sound of the doorknob rattling violently, as though someone outside was trying to get in. I froze, listening. The sound stopped abruptly, followed by silence so deep I could hear my own heartbeat. Then came the whisper, faint at first, then louder, seeping through the crack beneath the door. Get out, before it takes you too. I leapt from the bed and switched on the light, but the hallway outside was empty when I opened the door. No footprints, no shadows. Nothing but the flickering bulb at the end of the corridor. When I returned inside, the mirror was fogged, even though the air was cold. Written across it in smeared letters, were the words, "You're not alone." I couldn't sleep after the writing on the mirror. My pulse hammered in my ears as I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the door like it was the only thing holding back a flood of nightmares. The rain outside had softened, but the silence that followed was worse. It felt like the whole world had stopped breathing. Then I heard it again. Footsteps. Slow, heavy, each one making the old carpeted floorboards creak. This time they didn't stop at my door. They kept moving, closer, until I could hear them outside room 6. I dared to peek through the peephole. My throat went dry. There was a man standing there, his face obscured in shadow, his head tilted unnaturally to one side as though his neck had been broken. He wasn't moving, not even breathing, just standing there, waiting. Suddenly, he lifted his head slowly, and though I couldn't see his face clearly, I knew he was staring right into the peephole. I jumped back, my breath caught in my throat. But when I looked again, the hallway was empty. The next morning, the storm had cleared, and for a brief moment, the motel looked almost normal under the daylight. I went to the reception, but the old man was nowhere to be seen. On the counter sat an old, dusty ledger. I flipped through it, noticing more names dated decades ago. Then something slipped out from between the pages, a black and white photograph. It showed a group of travelers standing outside the motel, smiling stiffly at the camera. Their clothes looked old-fashioned, like the 60s. But one detail froze my blood. Standing behind them, in the motel's hallway window, was the same broken-necked man I had seen last night. His blurred face seemed to be staring directly at me, as if the photo had been waiting for me to find it. Determined to get answers, I went back to my room and started looking for anything out of place. I tapped the walls, opened the drawers, checked under the bed. That's when I noticed the carpet near the mirror was slightly loose. I pulled it back, revealing a small hatch in the floor. The wooden cover was old and cracked, but with some effort, I pried it open. A narrow crawl space stretched beneath the floorboards, and the smell that wafted up was putrid, like rot and mold mixed together. Inside the crawl space lay old suitcases, torn clothes, and children's toys. Every item looked like it had been abandoned in a hurry, as though the owners had never left the motel alive. And then I saw it. Carved into the wood, right beneath the mirror, were the words, "It watches through the glass." That night, I couldn't take my eyes off the cracked mirror. I covered it with a blanket, but no matter how I tried, I kept feeling like something on the other side was watching me. At exactly 3:12 a.m., the same time as before, the blanket slipped off on its own, falling to the floor. The mirror was no longer cracked. It was whole, perfect. And inside, I saw not my reflection, but the room as it was decades ago, pristine with fresh wallpaper and glowing lamps. In that reflection stood the broken-necked man, smiling with a wide, unnatural grin. He reached out and pressed his palm against the glass from inside. My reflection didn't move. It was gone. It was as if I was being replaced. I stumbled back, tripping over the chair, but the man in the mirror pressed harder, cracks splintering across the glass as though he was trying to break through. Panicked, I ran out of the room into the hallway. To my shock, every door along the corridor was now open. Inside each room were faint shadows of people, guests, families, truckers, sitting on beds, brushing their hair, reading newspapers. But their movements were jerky, unreal, like they were stuck on repeat. One by one, their heads turned toward me in unison. Their eyes were hollow, empty sockets, and they opened their mouths at the same time. A chorus of whispers filled the air, words overlapping. Stay. Join us. You can never leave. The hallway stretched longer than it should have, twisting into darkness, the exit sign flickering further and further away no matter how fast I ran. When I finally stumbled back to room 6, the mirror had shattered completely. The broken-necked man was no longer inside it. He was standing in the room. His twisted form towered over me, his smile stretching unnaturally across his face. You signed your name. Now you belong. I felt the floorboards buckle beneath me as the crawl space opened wider, pulling me down into the dark. The last thing I saw was dozens of pale hands reaching up, clawing at me, dragging me beneath the motel. Their faces, blurred, broken, and lifeless, were the same as those in the photographs. The storm raged again above as the Highway Rest Motel swallowed me whole, adding my name to its register of souls. And somewhere, in room 6, the mirror pieced itself back together, waiting for the next traveler. My name is Ethan Carter, and what I'm about to tell you has haunted me for years. Back in 2014, I was traveling through the Yukon, chasing abandoned places for a photography project. I loved capturing forgotten buildings, rusted signs, and lost highways. One night, I took a wrong turn off the main road and found myself on a narrow, cracked lane with no lights, no signs, and nothing but forest on either side. After nearly an hour of driving in circles, my GPS froze, showing me stuck in a blank zone. My fuel gauge was dangerously low. Just when I thought I was stranded for good, I saw it. An old, faded wooden sign, barely hanging onto a post. Welcome to Black Hollow. Relief washed over me. The town meant gas, food, and maybe even a motel. But as I drove further in, the relief began to die in my chest. The air grew unnaturally heavy, and a sickly yellow fog rolled across the cracked streets. Every house I passed looked abandoned. Windows boarded up, doors half open, roofs collapsing. And yet, I swear I saw curtains twitching, shadows moving inside. At the center of the town stood a gas station. Its neon sign buzzed faintly, half the letters burned out, so it only read, AS Station. For a moment, I thought maybe this was my salvation. I pulled in, killed the engine, and stepped out into the heavy silence. The air smelled metallic, like rust mixed with damp earth. The pumps were ancient, coated in grime, and the glass door to the small shop was cracked. I pushed it open, the bell above ringing weakly. Inside, the shelves were stocked. But everything was decades old. Dusty soda bottles with labels I hadn't seen since childhood. Canned food rusted shut. Newspapers from 1971 stacked neatly on the counter. And then I saw him. Behind the counter stood a man. His skin was pale, almost gray, his eyes cloudy like cataracts. He smiled stiffly. "Welcome, traveler," he rasped. "We've been expecting you." I froze, my stomach dropping. How could he have known I was coming? I left the gas station without buying anything, every instinct screaming at me to leave. But when I stepped outside, my car was gone. Not stolen, just gone. The parking lot was empty. The gravel where I'd parked was undisturbed. My legs shook as I staggered into the middle of the street. The town stretched in both directions, endless rows of buildings dissolving into fog. Somewhere far off, I heard the sound of children laughing. It echoed unnaturally, distorted, like it was being played through broken speakers. I walked toward it, desperate for proof of life. But the more I walked, the stranger things became. Houses that had been boarded up were now lit from within. Street lamps glowed faintly, one after another, as if guiding me deeper. And in the windows, I began to see faces. Not full bodies, just faces pressed to the glass, watching silently as I passed. Their mouths moved, whispering things I couldn't hear. And then, all at once, the laughter stopped. The silence pressed against me like a weight, so thick it made my ears ring. I stood frozen in the middle of that cracked street, heart hammering, staring at the rows of houses that seemed to lean in closer the longer I looked. That's when I heard it. A church bell. Slow, hollow, distant. The sound floated through the fog, each toll vibrating in my bones. I followed it, as if hypnotized, until I came to a clearing. There it stood, an old wooden church, its spire crooked, the bell tower swaying slightly, as if it shouldn't still be standing. The doors were wide open, revealing rows of pews. Candles burned inside, dozens of them, their flames flickering even though there was no breeze. And in the front row sat people, or what was left of them. Gray-skinned figures with hollow eyes, their heads tilted up toward the altar. None of them moved. None of them breathed. And on the altar itself was a book, massive, leather-bound, pulsing faintly with a light that didn't feel natural. My curiosity outweighed my fear for a moment, and I stepped inside. That was my mistake. The second my foot hit the church floorboards, the bell stopped tolling. Absolute silence consumed the space. The figures in the pews didn't move, but I felt their heads turn toward me without actually seeing it. My stomach churned as I crept down the aisle toward the altar. The book throbbed with a faint yellow glow. Strange symbols were carved into its cover, jagged like they had been burned in. My hands trembled, but I couldn't stop myself from reaching out. The instant my fingers touched it, a whisper exploded in my skull. "You shouldn't be here." I jerked my hand back, but the voice kept going. Layers of voices, male, female, childlike, all overlapping. They spoke of things buried beneath the town, of people swallowed whole, of a pact made with something ancient in exchange for eternal existence. The pews creaked. Slowly, the figures rose to their feet. Their heads snapped toward me in unison, jaws opening wide, wider than humanly possible. That was when the candles blew out. I bolted out of the church, my chest heaving, fog curling around me like claws. Behind me, the sound of dozens of footsteps echoed, slow and steady, as if they weren't running, but simply advancing. I sprinted through the streets, past collapsing houses and cracked lampposts, until I stumbled into what looked like a town square. In the center stood a fountain, long dried up, its stone cracked and covered in moss. Around it stood statues. At least, I thought they were statues. Pale stone figures of men, women, and children, all frozen mid-scream. As I stumbled closer, I realized with horror. These weren't statues. Their details were too perfect, too human. Fingernails, wrinkles, even strands of hair etched in stone. The whispers grew louder in my head. I clutched my temples, falling to my knees. The air shimmered, and for just a moment, I saw the truth. These weren't sculptures. They were people, trapped, their eyes moving inside stone faces, silently begging for help. And surrounding me, the fog things closed in. The air grew heavy, pressing down on me as if the fog itself had weight. My vision blurred, my chest tightened, and the sound of those whispers became unbearable. Like hundreds of mouths breathing into my ears at once. I staggered backward from the fountain, desperate to escape when I saw it. A shape moving inside the fog. It wasn't like the others. This thing was taller, broader, almost skeletal yet impossibly massive. Its arms were too long, dragging across the ground, scraping sparks on the cobblestones. Its face, or what looked like a face, emerged slowly from the mist, pale and stretched, its features twisted into something that mocked humanity. Its mouth unhinged, wider than its head, and a sound unlike anything I'd ever heard tore through the night. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't a growl. It was the sound of hundreds of voices, all shrieking in agony at once. The stone figures around the fountain shuddered violently, their stone cracking. Some of their faces moved, mouths opening in silent screams. And the monster in the fog turned its gaze toward me. I ran. I didn't care where, just away. My boots slammed against the cobblestones as I sprinted down a side street, the fog twisting like it wanted to hold me back. Behind me, the creature's shrieks rattled my bones, shaking the very air. I found myself back at the edge of town, where the cracked asphalt of a road led into the black forest. Relief surged through me. I was out. I could escape. But when I turned to look back, the town was gone. No fog, no buildings, no fountain, just dense trees stretching endlessly into darkness. I turned back toward the road, but now it didn't lead anywhere. It simply ended, cut off by more forest. That's when the whisper returned, louder, almost deafening. No one leaves Black Hollow. And then I saw them. Shadows slipping between the trees, hundreds of them, moving closer. Their shapes blurred like they weren't meant to exist in this world. The forest wasn't an escape. It was another prison. I stumbled through the forest, branches clawing at my arms until I collapsed against a tree. My lungs burned, my vision swam. And then I saw it. A carving etched deep into the bark. A symbol. The same jagged markings from the church's book. Dozens of trees around me bore the same symbols, some dripping with fresh sap like blood. My stomach twisted as realization dawned. The town wasn't abandoned. It was alive. Black Hollow wasn't just a place. It was something ancient, feeding off those trapped inside. The people turned to stone weren't victims. They were offerings. The whispers grew into words, almost human now. Stay. Join us. Eternity is waiting. I looked down at my hands. My skin was stiff, pale. Cracks ran along my arms like stone forming beneath my flesh. My fingertips were already gray. I wasn't running anymore. I was becoming part of the town itself. I staggered back into the clearing. Somehow, the church was there again, its spire looming, its bell tolling faintly in the distance. The figures from the pews stood outside now, waiting in perfect silence, their hollow eyes fixed on me. I dropped to my knees, every breath shallow, my body cracking like porcelain. The fog swirled higher, swallowing the sky, and from within it, the towering skeletal figure returned. It leaned down over me, its voice crawling inside my skull. You are ours now. The church bell tolled once more. With that sound, the last of my flesh turned to stone. My mouth froze open mid-scream, my eyes wide with terror, yet still moving, still alive inside my prison. And now, I am one of them, forever trapped in Black Hollow. A warning to anyone who dares wander too far into the fog. But if you ever hear the toll of that church bell in the distance, remember my story. Run the other way. Don't look back. Because once you enter Black Hollow, you never leave. The road, the towns, the houses, the forests. They all hold stories. Some are whispered through broken windows, some are buried in the silence of abandoned roads, and some stare back at us through the darkness when we least expect it. Tonight, we've walked together through 10 of the most disturbing true horror stories. Each one a reminder that sometimes reality is darker than any nightmare. Whether it's lonely highways, forgotten small towns, or the shadows that creep into our homes, the truth is, horror is never too far away. If these stories shook you to the core, then remember, fear connects us. It makes us realize how fragile the line is between safety and terror. Thank you for joining me on this terrifying journey. If you enjoyed these stories, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon so you never miss another nightmare. And one last thought before we part. The next time you drive down a dark road or hear a knock at your door late at night, ask yourself, is it just the wind? Or something else waiting in the shadows? This was Dark Fears. And until next time, sleep with one eye open.